Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I thought I would take some time and just talk about my 10 favorite nonfiction books of all time. There's been quite a lot of sporadic reading going on in my life these days, and I'm kind of trying to look back on things that I've enjoyed in the past to understand maybe where I should take my reading in the future. I'd also love to hear any kind of recommendations you guys could make based on this list that I give today. So let me know in the comments if there's any books that you think I would really enjoy based on the books I talk about today. Let's get into it. Coming in at number 10, we've got Undeniable by Bill Nye. Now, this is a book that is kind of about evolution versus creationism. This is a great kind of go-to first book for anyone who's interested in learning more about the theory of evolution, whether they want to learn about it in relation to religion or not, because Bill Nye uses a very calm, colloquial writing style, lots of jokes in there, and not too much fancy wording going on. There's a lot of language that's very easily digestible by those who are scientifically minded and for those who aren't. If you just, science has never been your thing, but you are interested, this is very much an approachable book, so I highly recommend that one. Coming in at number 9, we've got Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. This was the first book by Malcolm Gladwell that I had read. I read it on audiobook, and I've got to say, I don't think I can read another Malcolm Gladwell book without the audiobook because he does a great job of narrating. Outliers is basically a book that's all about bringing to light very specific examples, kind of that 1% or that 0.1% of people that are really good at something or really stand out in some way, and kind of breaking down why certain people might have more tendency to be outstanding or an outlier in some way than others. It's a really, really interesting concept. I think Gladwell does a great job of getting really deep into it and doing his research, and I would highly recommend it to pretty much anyone. Coming in at number 8 is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. In Order to Live, as I said, it goes through Yeonmi's journey as she escapes from North Korea and has to cross the Gobi Desert into Mongolia to seek freedom. It was my first book on North Korea, so I think it holds a little bit of a special place in my heart. And then also, Yeonmi is just like a total sweetheart. If you go and watch her YouTube channel, she just seems like the sweetest person ever, so I'm a little bit biased in that, but I highly recommend In Order to Live if you are interested in learning more about North Korea. Now, at number 7, I have put a recent read, and that is Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs by Caitlin Doughty. So in my last video, I read 3 books by Caitlin Doughty all about death. Spoiler alert, all 3 of them are on this list. And I would say that Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs was my least favorite of the 3, but it still makes it into my top 10 books of all time, nonfiction books of all time. Overall, this is a book that talks about death, and the way that the author went about doing that was she got children to ask questions about death, and she would try and answer them the best she could. It was really funny, it was really whimsical. If you like Caitlin's YouTube channel, then this is a great book to pick up because she also narrates all of her books, which is great. I really like her narration style. And if you want to learn more about death in a way that's not so serious and not so intimidating, this is a great place to start. Coming in at number 6, I actually had to put a book on here that I have not yet finished reading. And it's kind of sad because I've been mentioning this book on my channel for literally over a year. I think I started reading this book in May of 2020. It's been over a year and I still haven't managed to finish it. To be fair, it is a very long book. It's like 600 pages or something, and I've been trying to do it by reading and by audiobook. I'm just making excuses at this point. The book I'm talking about is She Has Her Mother's Laugh by Carl Zimmer. Now, this is a book that is all about heredity. It's kind of looking at genetics and what can be passed down and how those mechanisms work. But it's also looking at environmental influences and the history of heredity and how we came to understand what we do understand about it today. And that honestly is what gets that book on this list, even though it's not finished yet, like I haven't finished reading it yet, is just that I love when history and science are put together in one. There's just something about it that really takes the kind of clinical, analytical, scientific stuff and really brings it to this place of storytelling for me. Highly recommend She Has Her Mother's Laugh if you're interested in learning about genetics and heredity. Coming in at number 5, we've got another of Caitlin Doughty's books, and that was the second book that she ever wrote, and that is From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death. This one comes in at number 5, and I had a really hard time deciding if this book or the first book that she wrote, which of the two was my favorite compared to the other, and I ended up putting her first book, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory, at number 4. So number 5 was From Here to Eternity, and number 4 is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. And I think for both of these books, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes edged out From Here to Eternity just that little bit because it felt a little bit more personal, a little more intimate with the author. You really get to know her on a deeper level. She shares some very personal information in that book, and I think being a fan of her YouTube channel and everything, it was a really, really interesting look into her as a person, as well as the death industry and looking at kind of crematories and all of that jazz. My number 5 book was From Here to Eternity, which was the book where she basically chapter by chapter went through and looked at different cultures, death rituals and practices, and explained them from a very anthropological point of view, which I really, really like. I love anthropology. So those were my number 4 and number 5 books, all about death by Caitlin Doughty. My number 3 book is a book that I read a very, very long time ago. It's NPH's autobiography. I listened to it on audiobook. He narrates his own audiobook, and he is a theater and acting genius and humor genius in my opinion. Therefore, it was a great experience, and I highly recommend it if you are a fan of NPH. He basically just goes through his life, tells you little stories and anecdotes, exactly what you might expect from an autobiography of NPH. And if you like him, I highly recommend that you pick that one up on audiobook because it is just such a good time. It is hilarious, and that is why it lands in my number 3 spot of my favorite nonfiction books of all time. So in my number 2 spot, this is a book that I actually didn't really realize had impacted me as significantly as it did until I was trying to make this list, and I was like, you know what, this is actually potentially my favorite book of the year so far, and that is Can't Even by Anne Helen Petersen. Can't Even is basically a look at why millennials are the burnout generation. I am a millennial. I was born in 95, so I am just 1 year removed from that cutoff. I think it's those born in 1996 would be considered millennials, 97 would not. I definitely relate to a lot of the issues that were discussed in the book Can't Even that talk about how millennials are dealing with being this generation of burnout, being this generation that was kind of brought up and told that, if you just work hard, if you just pull up your bootstraps, like you'll really get ahead in life, you'll really be successful, you'll get a job, you'll this, you'll that. And so many of us, not all of us, but so many of us find ourselves in this place where we find that not to be true. Or we find that because we were brought up in that way, we don't know how to relax. Of course, there are lazy millennials out there. There's lazy people in every generation. Reading Can't Even honestly just made me feel like, okay, I'm not the only one. So I would really, really recommend this book to anyone who thinks that they may be struggling with things that the millennial generation seems to typically be struggling with. If you are a millennial, whether you struggle with these things or not, it's a great read. And then if you're from other generations and maybe you don't quite understand why millennials are so outspoken about kind of these things that we're going through, I think it could be a really great place to learn, to get kind of another point of view. I'm not going to say that everything in the book is 100% correct or accurate or this or that, but I do know that it gave me a lot of peace of mind and it gave me a lot of comfort to read, so I do highly recommend it for those reasons. Coming into my number 1 spot for my favorite nonfiction books of all time, if you've been here for a while, you have definitely heard me talk about this book, and that's because it was my favorite book of 2019. I am, of course, talking about The Feather Thief. So The Feather Thief by Kirk Wallace Johnson is a nonfiction book about a true crime story. However, this true crime story takes a sharp turn to be right up my alley because it goes into museums and biology and the history of evolution, and it's just this really, really interesting true crime story. Basically, the story is, so many years ago there was an individual who got really, really into fly fishing flies, like making the flies. He got really, really into that, and he decided that he needed more and more feathers for his collection that he could use in creating these fly fishing flies. One thing led to another, and he ended up robbing this museum in England of a whole bunch of essentially bird carcasses that were part of their natural history collection. Yeah, it's a wild story. I don't want to give too much away because, it's a crime story, but it is a wild story, and I highly recommend it. I listened to the audiobook. I listened to it while I was in Europe, actually. Normally, when I'm experiencing a new place, I don't want to be listening to anything or distracted by anything or reading anything because I want to be taking in the place that I'm in. However, I did find that sometimes when I was on trains or traveling by car or whatever, I would kind of cheat and put one earphone in because I was really, really into this book. It was so good, and it's written so well that you almost question if it is a fiction story, because you're like, this is written so well that it seems like it's like a story being told. Highly recommend The Feather Thief. It's also just got a beautiful cover, so definitely want that one on your shelf. So that's everything I've got for you today. Those are my top 10 favorite nonfiction books that I've read. Let me know in the comments below if you've got some other recommendations based on my list. I think I'm also going to do a top 5 least favorite nonfiction books. Let me know if you'd be interested in seeing that by dropping a like on this video, and go ahead and drop a comment down below if you'd like to see that as well. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!